While we are sitting here, safe by the fire, there are some who are quite unaware of events that have happened not too far from here, and it's something I feel I must share. There are some of you cynics who might not believe that the story that follows is true, but I urge you to listen and take it all in, or the next victim could well be you. It was 10 years ago, on a miserable night where the rain seemed to endlessly pour. A young man and his girlfriend were caught in the rain, soaking through all the clothes that they wore. And as the pair tramped through the dense undergrowth, looking quickly for somewhere to dry, they only succeeded in getting more lost and more frantic the harder they try. The couple were tiring and starting to doubt that they'd ever find somewhere to rest, when they stumbled across a small hut in the clearing. Relieved, they completed their quest. So they raced hand in hand through the dense undergrowth and approached the small hut without fear. They were cold and soaked through and did not stop to check that the coast was entirely clear. As they ran to the door, they could see it was locked, but they found it quite easy to break, as they desperately needed to shelter inside, and the man's macho pride was at stake. The door opened wide as he kicked it with force, and the pair rushed in boldly to see that a fire had been lit which was cooking a stew that was obviously somebody's tea. Well, the pair simply could not believe their good fortune as they rushed inside, closing the door, and they sat down to eat bowls of warm, tasty stew, never questioning who it was for. Well, they wolfed down the food as their search for the shelter had given them some appetite. And they relished the warmth they received from the broth, feeling better with every bite. As the young couple gorged on this most welcome meal, they agreed it was fit for a king, as the sauce was so rich and the veg was so ripe, they really could not fault a thing. But the meat, they remarked, was just out of this world, really tender and cooked to perfection. They decided that this was the tastiest meal in the world, after quite some reflection. As they were starting their third bowl of stew, the couple were given a fright, as a terrible noise came from somewhere outside, and it pierced through the cold, stormy night. The noise started quietly and resembled a thud that was followed by some kind of grunt, and it sounded just like something being cut up with a tool that was probably blunt. When the couple heard this, they stayed perfectly still, praying hard for the noise to subside. And they clung to each other in panic and fear, hoping no one knew they were inside. All of a sudden, the noises stopped dead, and all they could hear was the rain, and they hoped that whatever it was had now gone and would not be returning again. But just when the couple were feeling at ease, they heard yet another wet thud. Then the sound of some footsteps came nearer and nearer as someone approached through the mud. The footsteps then stopped as they came to the hut, and the door handle started to turn. They were soon to be faced with an unwelcome guest, and their stomachs both started to churn. The door was flung open, and there in the night they could make out a stooped human shape, as he stood for a moment surveying the scene and blocking their means of escape. "I see I have guests," cried the man in the doorway. "My, this is a pleasant surprise. Please, stay and get warm with a nice bowl of stew." And before he could hear their replies, he had served up 3 bowls of the wonderful broth, and he sat down and joined them to eat. I don't get guests often being deep in these woods, so I must admit this is a treat." The couple were now feeling somewhat relieved as their hearts had been all of a flutter. And the man seemed so friendly as he welcomed them in, and he didn't seem much like a nutter. And although they were both feeling bloated by now, they could hardly refuse the man's stew, so they carried on eating so as not to offend. It was the least that the couple could do. "To what do I owe this great pleasure on this such a horrible night?" And the young couple thought that they'd tell the whole truth. After all, it was only polite. "We decided to go for a walk in these woods, but quite soon we were caught in this storm, and we frantically looked for somewhere we could shelter where we could dry out and get warm. Well, just as we thought that our search was in vain, and it seemed like pneumonia was nearing, we stumbled across the most welcoming sight of your hut, on its own in this clearing. Well, without any thought to who lived in the place, and our only concern of survival, we had to break in and get warm by the fire. That's what led to our rapid revival. The hermit had listened and started to laugh. It wasn't the fire, he knew. But surely what really saved both of your lives was the nourishment in this fine stew. The young man laughed nervously, glancing around, while his lover just stared at the floor. Well, you're obviously fans of my recipe. Maybe you both like it a little bit more. At this point, the couple were totally stuffed, because they'd both really eaten their fill. And although this man's stew was remarkably good, if they ate any more, they'd be ill. I'm really quite full, sir, but thank you for asking, replied the young girl with a smile. But the hermit looked hurt. You're not full in the least. I can tell that you think my stew's vile. The girl quickly leapt to the hermit's defence. Oh no, nothing is further from true. We both liked it so much we ate several bowls. What is in this magnificent stew? Well, the hermit looked bashful and lowered his eyes. Oh, you only say that to be kind. No, I'd love to be able to cook one myself. Are the ingredients easy to find? Well, the hermit breathed in and he paused for a moment. And then he breathed out again with a sigh. Well, this broth has been cooked to my secret recipe and will stay with me until I die. But if you enjoy it as much as you say, I could well be persuaded to tell. If you both swear you won't breathe a word to a soul. If we do, may we both go to hell. Very well, said the hermit. I'll tell you my secret to making this wonderful stew. But I promise, if ever I find that you've told, it will be the last thing that you do. First, you take some fresh cabbage and slice it up thin, and you leave it to soak in red wine. Then you dice up some carrots and turnips and swede, and you boil it all up in some brine. Next, you make up a sauce out of gravy and stock, and you simmer for 2 to 3 hours. Then you season with pepper and plenty of salt. And then add in some local wildflowers. And just when the mixture is starting to thicken, you stir in the cabbage and wine. Then you throw in the carrots and turnips and swede, and by now it is smelling divine. But the special ingredient is still yet to come that will make this meal so good to eat. Because when all of the veg and the sauce are prepared, then you're ready to add in the meat. You must cut off large chunks with a knife or an axe, and you wash it in warm olive oil. Then you rub it with salt and some black peppercorns. Not too much, or the flavour will spoil. Then you throw it all in with the rest of the mix, and you leave it to stand for an hour. And you simmer for 20 hours more with the lid on. Till then, it's just right to devour. The young girl tried hard to take everything in so the recipe would be complete. She remembered the veg and the times for the sauce, but she couldn't remember the meat. Well, I got most of that, said the girl with a smile. But what meat did you use in the stew? Is it rabbit or pheasant, or maybe it's lamb, or will any old animal do? Well, the hermit looked shocked as he answered the girl, no, the meat's most important of all. It's a rare piece of flesh that's not easy to find, so your chances of doing so are small. There's a place that I use where this meat can be found, but to get it I go to great pains, because I have to walk miles to the nearest graveyard, where I dig up some human remains.